All right. Good morning, everyone. It's Tom Maxwell here from the Last Visit First podcast studio, doing a little bit of a hospice recap of the 2027 Hospice Proposed Rule. Just going to walk through kind of the proposed rule, some of my thoughts, some interesting facts that we figured out, and look through a few things. So by myself today, not interviewing anybody for this one, but wanted to put out a few statements around this. So start the stage or set the stage. I want to break down the most important pieces of this rule that came out. It's not just a rate increase. There's some other factors in it that are going to be really important. The rule introduces a brand new scoring system that every hospice in America gets a public grade. And it landed the same week that the FBI showed up at the hospices in California. So that was a really interesting, bizarre thing. So let's break it down by the numbers. CMS is proposing a 2.4% payment increase for hospice providers in fiscal year 2027. That sounds like good news. And at this point, it is good news. But we want to increase this as a roughly $785 million in payments over FY 2026. And the annual cap goes up from $35,361 to $36,210. I created this chart using my friends at Perplexity from 2018 all the way up to the proposed 2027, which is the red line on the upper right-hand side there you see. We've gone from 28,689 as a cap all the way up to 36,210. So that's in 2018 to this year, 2027 proposed rule. That's a super interesting climb, but you can see the percentage of increase is the light blue blocks below the numbers there. So we went from 3.1 to 2.9 to 2.6, and now it's dropping to 2.4. So you can see we're kind of getting a compression around the hospice cap. Now, remember, hospice cap is not wage adjusted. So if you're in California, the number of days it takes you to get to 36,210 is different than if you're in South Carolina or rural Mississippi or Minnesota or wherever. And so that was an interesting fact as we started putting these slides out and these graphs out as we were evaluating this rule. And Cole could share that, or you guys could take a screenshot of it if you want that data for any of your board books or anything like that. Please take it. There's a little bit of a catch to this. So in the 2.4% is also the exact amount of the U.S. inflation rate for the past 12 months ending in February of 2026. So they took the exact amount of the increases, what the inflation rate is. So in real terms, hospice providers are essentially breaking even. So if you think about inflation, the cost of gas, the cost of supplies, the cost of DME and those kind of things, it's essentially break even. So the industry reaction to this has been a really interesting one. So Jennifer Sheets is the new CEO over at the National Alliance for Care at Home. She put out a pretty good statement that says, while a 2.4% payment increase is better than a decline, it's a step in the right direction. But more must be done to ensure that high-quality providers have the resources they need to operate in this demanding environment. So I thought that was a pretty good statement from Jennifer. So Jennifer, thanks for please posting that out. And then Leading Age's Linda Couch put out that even more direct, the payment rate barely keeps up with inflation and threatens the ability of quality-focused, mission-driven providers to deliver the care. So we're staying with inflation, but that's the rate increase that we got. The second piece of this that I thought was the most interesting is they introduced this new SSVI, or it's called the new report card for every hospice. SSVI stands for Service and Spending Variation Index. So that's a new term that we're going to have to learn, like the HOPE term, like the HCI term. So SSVI. And think of this as a public report card that CMS is now giving to every hospice in the country. The score runs from 0 to 16 points. Okay, that's going to be really important in a minute. The lower the score, you're fine. The higher the score, expect scrutiny. And so let's go through this score and figure out how it's calculated. First, before we jump into the details of the 9 measures, let's talk about why we think they did this. So CMS noticed a troubling pattern. Patients enrolled in hospice were running up enormous bills of services outside of hospice. So these are fees that, well, CMS is paying you for your hospice care. They're paying you your $165 to $210. These are fees or services that are running outside of that hospice billing. So like Part D medications and different kind of supplies and those kind of things. And these are all the things that CMS believes that hospices should be covering, but they're not covering. One of the most dramatic examples is billing for pressure ulcers. So these new pressure ulcers and skin substitutes went up from $18 billion in fiscal year 2020 up to $714 million in 2024. That's nearly a 4,000% increase in the last 4 years. That is not a normal variation, and that is a signal. And so we believe that that's kind of driving a lot of what's going on here. What are the 9 measures? Let's talk about all 9 measures they're going to be looking at. So and a lot of these, by the way, I found reference to what we had in the HCI measures that the government put out a few years ago. So no continuous hospice care or GIP services provided. Hospices that never provide high acuity care looks a lot like it's not meeting the patient's needs. And so that's a score. That's a 1 point. High percentage of days in nursing home or SNF. So 40% or more days in nursing homes or SNF. It suggests possible facility-based enrollment schemes. So they're looking at that one as well. Few visits in the last 2 days. So this is the HDLVD, hospice visits last days of life. So a few visits in the last 2 days, there's a score around that. So patients deserve hands-on care as they approach death, and CMS is really pushing us to do that. So if you're not there when the patient's declining, then you have to think about that. Remember, I built the Muse product to really help resolve this, to really help you predict when patients are declining. So if you're not a Mosaic Muse customer and you're in hospice, go look at that product. It's going to really help you solve this one. Another favorite, high live discharge rates. So anything in the 75 percentile is a major signal for enrollments that were not truly terminal. So if you have a lot of really high long length of stay discharge rates, you're going to see scrutiny around that. High percent of long length of stay patients. Long length of stay patient is categorized in this ruling as 180 days or more. So if you have a lot of patients that are high or long length of stay patients, a majority of your patients are long length of stay, you're going to get deducted there as well. Low skilled nursing minutes per day. So now they're looking at your in-home time. Super important when your nurses log into the home and they ring the doorbell, when they go in and they see the patient's eyes, is the way I always taught it. Start the visit. When you end the visit, have the patient sign, and you're walking out the door, stop the visit. That time in the home is publicly reported on your claims. That data is going to be super important to make sure that you're capturing as much of that data as you can. The worst thing you can do is have a nurse that goes in, starts seeing the patient, all that, then starts the medical device or starts the point of care device, and we don't capture the entirety of the time. So spending more time with the patient, that's what CMS wants. Spend more time with the patient, make sure your nurses are doing the documentation appropriately, and make sure that we're accurately capturing that data when we're reporting that. Low weekend visit rate. So this is hospice is 24/7. Where the industry as a whole sees more patients on Monday through Friday, so less on Saturday and Sunday. The government's now looking at this and saying, how often are you doing weekend visits? By the way, that was an HCI measure as well. High rate of patients returning within 7 days. So it's the what they call the revolving door of enrollment is a major red flag. So lots of visits, lots of patients returning within 70 days. And then the last one, which is the most impactful and carries up to 8 points. So there's 16 points. So all those other ones equal 8. And this last one equals 8 points as well. And that's non-hospice spending. The heaviest measure, definitely looking at those with patients with ulcers, those patients with Part D medications that aren't covered under service and things like that. So that's the one that's going to really trip the red flag. Again, it's worth 8 points of the 16 points. The more points you get, the higher your number, the more flags you're going to get, the more scrutiny you're going to see. So hopefully that makes sense to you on that, on the SSVI, Service Spending Variation Index. That's what that's about. The next piece is really around operations never say die. And here's the story that gets bigger in the proposed rule. On April 2nd, 2026, the same day CMS published this rule, like I said earlier, the FBI agents fanned out across Los Angeles executing arrest warrants before 6 a.m. Operation was called Never Say Die. That's where that operations never say die. 15 defendants charged, 8 arrested, $60 million in alleged Medicare fraud in LA County alone. One nurse in this story that I read had 85% of non-death discharge rate. So 85% of her patients that she was caring for were discharged, or non-death discharges, mean they were live discharges. It's a pretty scary number when you start looking at that. The national average is around 17%. So she was nearly 5 times the national average. Again, giant red flag. Monitor this very closely. Make sure you're reviewing these patients. We call a thing called super IDG that we do on patients that are long length of stay, that are going to be live discharged. We review them very closely and make sure we're appropriately managing all these patients, that they're eligible for care, and then we're discharging them appropriately. According to the House Oversight Committee, which is kind of the guys that manage all these rules, if you didn't know that, they established a fraudulent Medicare reimbursement from LA County alone to reach $3.5 billion. CMS's administrator, Dr. Oz, stated publicly that he believes roughly half of LA hospices may be fraudulent. It's a big statement and a scary statement as well. More than 220 hospices approvals in California have been revoked in the last 10 weeks. And this is not saying in California. CMS has already expanded enhanced oversight into Georgia and Ohio, on top of Arizona, California, Nevada, and Texas. Federal authorities have said explicitly they expect this to become a rolling national enforcement campaign. So how do you connect all that to the SSVI? The SSVI is the infrastructure CMS is building to make the national campaign possible. It is not a transparency tool. It is a targeting system. They're going to look at this data and figure out which hospices they need to go look at and probe into. Hospices with high scores are going to find themselves under review. If you're in that situation where you're at a 14, 15, 16, or I think anything above 10, you're going to start getting scrutinized, and they're going to come in and look at your business. The review can lead to audits. Audits can lead to revocations. Revocations lead to IJs, immediate jeopardies, where they'll take your license or shut down your Medicare reimbursement. Super, super important. Pay attention to this. A couple of things that are changing. There's a mandatory election statement amended. So right now, hospice only have to provide a written list of services not covered under the hospice benefit if the patient asks for it. Starting on October 1st of 2026, if this rule gets approved, again, this is a proposed rule. So if this rule gets approved, every patient gets that document at the time of enrollment. So you're going to have to give them a document that says these are the things that are covered and these are the things that are not. No request is now required. CMS looked at the data and conducted this ask-only model is not working. Non-hospice Medicare spending for enrollment beneficiaries has gone up significantly every year since 2020 through 2024. The theory is that patients do not know how to ask or when to ask, and some hospices are not exactly advertising that fact. So it's going to be important to look at that. What this means operationally to you, what you need to think about. Every intake workflow needs to be updated. Your clinical billing and admissions teams need to know what this is coming. They need to understand it. They need to be trained on it, and they need to make sure that you put in processes that'll make sure that we're following this. If your amendment process is not already airtight, October 2026 gives you about 6 months from now to get there. So make sure you start looking at this. If that report goes in, when the final rule comes out, you'll have about 60 days to adjust your workflow processes. And hopefully the EMRs out there enhance their product to ensure that we're enforcing this. And then Section 5, the quality reporting and Medicare.gov icon. So about 1 in 5 hospices consistently, year after year, are not submitting the required quality data to CMS. And 1 in 5 are not submitting the data that they're supposed to submit. In fiscal year 2025, that number was 23.5% of all hospices did not submit their data. This is not just classifying the hospices' names, it's the provider numbers, the P10s. Despite a 4 percentage point payment penalty for noncompliance, the needle has barely moved. What does that mean? There's approximately a 4% deduction if you don't submit your claims data or your HOPE data and those things. And if you haven't submitted those, there's a 4% deduction. So 23.5% of the population is not doing it. CMS is now proposing to add a public icon to the Medicare.gov Care Compare website, identifying hospices that failed to submit their data or fall below the 90% submission threshold. This would take effect no earlier than fiscal year 2028, but that data determines who gets the icon is being generated right now in the calendar year 2026. So if you're not submitting your data, you're going to get an icon. I don't know if it's going to be an X or a thumbs down or what it's going to be, but it's going to impact you. If anybody goes onto the website and says, I want to compare, multiple hospices, which one do I want to put Nana into? If you haven't submitted your data, you're going to get a thumbs down icon or some kind of an X icon. And so that's going to be negative for you. Patients and families use Medicare.gov to choose hospice providers. Usually there's a list that's provided with a link. A noncompliance icon is visible, public, and permanently until corrected. For any organization that has not yet fully operationalized their HOPE submission workflows, the deadline is closer than you think. Start doing it. Start looking at it. Figure out how. Call us. We'll help you. I promise. And the last section, Section 6, what should you do right now? What should you be thinking about as we sit here today? Look at your SSVI scores. When it's published on the CMS Hospice Center webpage, know where you stand and know what you need to adjust in order to get your numbers corrected. If you have a high live discharge rate, start looking at those patients that you're doing check eligibility. Make sure you're looking at those. If you're not doing weekend visits, think about how you correct that. If you're not doing time in the home, make sure that your EMR is tracking appropriate time in the home. If you have long length of stay patients, make sure they're being reviewed appropriately. You don't want to have this target on your back if you can keep from it. Audit your non-hospice spending patterns. I can't say that enough. Look at all those patients in which you're not paying for that stuff under hospice. Measure 9 carries half the total weight. If your patients are running up outside bills, find out why and try to adjust it. We have to figure this out. Prepare your election statement addendum workflow for October 2026. Super important. Update your intake processes, train your staff, make sure they understand these rules and what's coming, and make sure the documentation is airtight. You have to have special clinical documentation for this. Get above the 90% on HOPE submissions. Seems like it's so easy to do, but you got to get you got to get those submissions done. Put workflow processes in place to test this. Put processes in place to QA your process. Make sure you're checking this. Add it to your board decks. Add it to your monthly reporting. Make sure you're talking to the right people inside your organization to get this done. The CY 2026 data will determine whether you get non-compliance icon on the Medicare.gov website. You don't want that. So start dealing with this today, or you're going to get it in 2028. And the last thing I need you to help us do is consider submitting public comments to CMS by June 1st of 2026. This proposed rule is opened up for public comments. Start looking at it. Start thinking about what you want to write. Collaborate with your peers. Work with the Alliance. Work with Maxwell Tech. Work with your EMR vendors. Work with the other consulting companies out there. Let's draft a good quality document. This is good for most hospices, but bad for some. And we need to be able to submit our comments. And CMS reads those comments. They always respond to them when they read them. And this will help impact the final rule that comes out in later in the year, like August timeframe is when it usually comes out. Okay, that's all I have for you right now. If you need to reach me, tom@maxwelltech.com. Go to the LinkedIn webpage. Go to the Last Visit First podcast. I'm there. You can reach out at sales@maxwelltech.com. Love to help you with this. Hopefully this quick summary of the rule is helpful to you and your team. And happy to answer any questions or collaborate with you, let you look at our draft of what we're submitting from our comment period as well. Everybody take care, be blessed, and have a great day.